Okay, in order to run the shallow water model, we have to provide an input file, the so-called runtime input parameter file, the .in file. Where is this .in file? Well, let's go from the home directory, let's go into the example directory, and then we're going to go in the shallow 2D where we have our example. So this is our directory structure. And so if you remember, when you run the model, if you check the run model PBS function, among the things that you need to provide is the executable and then some runtime parameters which are stored in this case in a file called shallow2d.in. Okay, this is my choice of name. So in this file is stored in the input directory. So let's go in the input directory and do nl. And if we do that, we find that we have three files here. We have the grid file that we generated, the initial condition file, and we have this parameter file. So let's open this parameter file and let's configure it. Okay, so this is the beginning of the parameter files. Once again, you know that all information about all these parameters that we'll find is contained at the end of this file. So if you go back here, for example, this is at the end of the file you have information about, you know, all the parameters. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind. But let's start from the beginning. So we're going to go down, scroll down, and okay, so the first thing is, you know, since this is going to be a parallel job, you know, what is the domain decomposition? It's going to be a 2 by 2, meaning that we're going to use 4 CPUs. Now, how long do we want to run this? Well, in this case, before we do that, we have to decide what is the time step. Now, because we're doing gravity waves, and this is a barotropic model, we really have to use a short time step. So you can play around with the time step, but in this case, a good time step is about 240 seconds. And you know, I haven't really explained how to select the appropriate time step, but you know, one way to do it is random trial, of course, but the other one is to use the stability criteria that we will do in class. But for now, it's 240 seconds. Okay, so if that's the time step, then we have to you know, decide how long we want to run this, and I think that I selected about 180 days. So if I want 180 days, this is my MATLAB prompt. So I have 200, okay, I have 180 days times 60, sorry, it's times 24 hours times 60 minutes times 60 seconds divided by 240. And that comes to about 64,800 time step. So let's go back there. So that's exactly what I put in here. Okay, so that's about 180 days. And that's because I want to see at the, you know, both the transient response, the fast gravity waves, which propagate like in 2 days across the domain, as we said, but also the slow moving waves, which take, you know, a longer time. It can take up to 47 days and so forth, you know, depending from the parameters that you choose. Okay, so that's good. So then we go further down here, and we have to define, you know, how often to write the records of the history file. In this case, I decide to use every 72 time step, which is equivalent to about 4.8 hours. And you can do the math again in MATLAB by doing 240 seconds times 72 time step divided by hours, and it's 4.8 hours. And that's important because, you know, as I said, these gravity waves, if you want to see the adjustment process, they take only 2.5 days to go through. So you want to at least see it every 4 hours in order to see them moving. Okay. Okay, so going back, so that's one thing. Then we have to define, you know, how often to save the average file. And I selected 360. Every 360 time step, which I believe is every day. Let me make sure that this is true. So 240 seconds times 360 time step divided by 60. It's about 24 hours, so that's good. So that means that, you know, we could see the slow moving solution every day. Okay. We could also use longer period if we wanted, but this is just my choice. You know, in this case. So other things, if we go down, of course, for example, if we go down here, we find that there's some horizontal viscosity coefficient, but in this case we don't have horizontal diffusion, so we don't need to do anything there. Okay, now this is the bottom drag coefficients, okay, constant using momentum stress, and in this case we have a linear drag, and I've decided to use a zero drag so that there's no dissipation of momentum in the bottom either. So the walls, if you think, you know, the fluid can slip through the bottom without any friction. So that's good. The parameters of the coordinate system that I'm going to use are going to be 0 and 0, which means that the coordinate is just yeah, uniformly stretched. Okay, so every layer has equal same amount of depth for this particular case. Now we go down, we have to define still other things like the name of the input files. So I'm going to go further down here, all the way down. Okay, so now I have to give the netcdf input files, in particular the grid file, which is input / shallow 2D grid, and the initial condition file, which is shallow 2D -init. So that's done. Remember, in the Coriolis you only had the grid file, and this you didn't have the initial condition, but now we also have the initial condition. We don't have a forcing file for so far, so we leave it at that. Then we have to give the name of restart file, which is going to be rst in our case, and it's going to be stored in the directory out. We're going to have the history file, which is the the snapshot every, we said, 4.8 hours. So this is going to be in out/hist.nc. And now we're also going to introduce this new file called the out/avg file, which stands for average, which is going to contain the average solution, which for us is going to be like the somehow filtered solution to look at the slow moving component. So this is all for this input file. Okay, I'm going to save this before I close. So now really all I need to do is, since I already have all the files in place, I can go here and then submit the job by doing qsub of this.